Okay, so I recently posted the video of me doing my first solo flight in an airplane, and I ended up getting so many questions, and it made me realize that when I was prepping for the spot I'm at in my pilot training, I did some YouTube searching, and there wasn't enough videos on the information that I wanted to have by this point in the process. So in today's video, I'm gonna be going over how I got to where I am now in the pilot training school, some steps as to what I would do differently, and then what it looks like next. So this is great for anybody in Canada that is thinking about pursuing a pilot license, whether that's a PPL, which is the private pilot's license, or a commercial pilot's license, and just figuring out if this is for you or not. So let's get right into it. Okay, so the first thing that I would recommend to anybody that's considering even a little tiny bit of pursuing getting your pilot's license is doing what's called a FAM flight. And essentially it's a familiarization flight. I used to think it was a fan flight. Any pilot school in the country is gonna be able to offer a version of this. Usually it's at a much subvented price. So I think at the school that I started at, it was like $100 or $150. And essentially what that experience is to give you is to take you up in a small airplane with an instructor, have them doing most of the stuff, gives you a feel for like how it feels to be in a plane, how it smells to be in a plane, all of the busy work that it takes to fly a plane. And then usually at some point in that process, you're gonna get controls of the plane and do some things like some turns and some ups and downs and stuff like that, just to get a feel for what it's gonna be like. The reason I find this to be a super important first step is imagine you did all the studying in the world or invested a ton of money into the curriculum for flight school, and then you get in the airplane and you're like, I don't like the feeling of this. It feels like a roller coaster, or my tummy doesn't like it. Or wow, that was really annoying. It was really loud and there and stuff like that. So it's a great first step, and usually students will know if this is for them or not by that first FAM flight. For me, the first time I went in an airplane, I absolutely knew it was for me because I found myself not only enjoying the view from up there, but also enjoying the process of getting to that view. And maybe I didn't notice all the intricate details of how we got up there, like the switches or the techniques or even the radio calls. But once I was up there, I was starting to pay attention to like, oh, this guy has to do a lot of things to get here, and I want to learn what those things are. So first step for me is doing a FAM flight. From there, I would highly recommend getting an online subscription to ground school. This is usually a pretty, like in the year 2025, it's a really small investment for a really big return. And what I mean by that is for usually like $300 or $400, you can get subscription to all of the information for ground school. The website I use is called Hangar. And ironically enough, the person doing the talking is actually from the school I started with. And I ended up changing schools, and I'll talk about that later. But he was at the school that I was in. It's usually a 10 to 20 minute video followed by a quiz to make sure you actually got the content in the video. The reason I think that's important is you're gonna touch on things that you're gonna need to know to fly the airplane, like how mixture works on the engine and how to make it most efficient, or what de-icing is, or how a carburetor works, or the theory of flight. All of those are really early videos on the Hangar Online School. And I found myself getting more and more excited as I was going through those quizzes. And it's also a really good testament to be like, okay, is this something do I really want to listen about when to carb de-ice and how to properly trim an airplane for straight level flight, and the theory of flight and critical angles of attack and those sorts of things? Or is it boring and I just want to fly an airplane? Because if you find it boring, that means the schooling is going to be really tough for you, or at least like you're going to need another motivating factor for sure. Okay, so while you're doing the online schooling, it's really important to start doing flight lessons. So a lot of times you could go back to that same school you did your FAM flight, maybe even the same instructor. And my good friend Rick, who got me into all this, one of the people that got me into all this, recommended to make sure I vibe well with the instructor, because at the end of the day, you're going to be in a little tin box with them for hours and hours on end. So it will make it a more pleasurable process if you like the person that you're going to be in that little box with. I would put skill level above that, like having a teacher that knows their stuff is going to be more important. However, having those rough days in flight school or like after a lesson, having someone that you feel encouraged by will just mean that you'll stick with it, because a very small percentage of people actually see this through. Once you start doing those actual flight lessons, Now that ground school is gonna start to make sense. So let's say you do 2 or 3 lessons in the airplane, you're starting to get familiar with how it feels, you're taking the controls once in a while. Usually the instructor is gonna demonstrate something and then you're going to follow along. My next step for you is going to be get your medical. And the reason I say that is because imagine investing all that time and money into flight training school to only find out that you cannot medically fly that airplane. And there's a little bit of a wait list for it, so it's great to like get it out of the way. You have to find your local aviation doctor, and then from there, be able to make sure you go get your ears checked, your eyes checked, everything in between. And then wait for Transport Canada to give that information back to you. I went for the category that allowed me to become a commercial pilot if I wanted to. I think it's category 1. But even for PPL, I think you could do well with like a 2 or a 3 or something like that, which is a less stringent type requirement. But I just wanted to make sure I was able to pass it in case I wanted to pursue this any further. And I got that done out of the way early. So as you're doing the flight lessons, the next thing is to get a flight training manual. And maybe your instructor is gonna have you buy one of these after your first flight. That's what mine did. And it's a really good resource because now you're gonna follow along on the theory of the lessons. And this is very different than the ground school. So for instance, how an airport works, the different parts of an airplane. It even shows the different gauges of an airplane. And then you get into the actual exercises. So for instance, one of the first exercises is straight and level flight. I know that sounds easy if you've never flown an airplane before, but if you haven't, you'll realize that, oh, there is more to keeping that airplane straight level than just pushing the joystick or the yoke in or out. There's different trims, there's different power settings, stuff like that. And then you get into turns and range and endurance and all the things, slipping, which is a different sort of maneuver you're gonna learn. And it gives you a write-up, it shows you great pictures, and it is an absolute must. I used to read one chapter of this or one exercise of this before the lesson so that my briefing with the instructor, because you're paying for how long you're doing your briefing, how long you're in the airplane with the instructor, would just be more efficient, and they didn't have to like teach me the bare basics. I had a little bit of understanding here. And it's cool too, because when you're doing this with the ground school, you're learning things over here about, you know, theories and mechanical mechanisms and stuff like that, and then you're putting it in action over here. And are they gonna always be totally relating each other at the exact moment? No, but then it will make sense. Like for instance, when you're learning to put your carb heat on, you might think, well, why do I even need to do that? Where you realize in ground school, it talks about carb icing and how the Venturi effect in those old carburetors can create ice even if it's above freezing in the air around you. So that is just like part of getting the most out of the actual training itself. And I should take this minute to remind everybody that it's not just about getting your hours in. It's about gaining the necessary skills during those hours to be able to fly the plane. A lot of people always ask me, like, how many hours is it gonna take you to get your airplane license? It's not about that. It's about how many skills do you need to get there? How many little things do you have to perfect as you go? The hours will just come. By the time you're ready to fly the plane, the hours will be there. That's just how it works. Okay, so now you're doing your lessons with one hand with a great instructor who you vibe along well with. Maybe you're doing it once a week, maybe you're doing it twice a week. You're crushing ground school, maybe it's a couple hours a week as well. And don't forget, because of weather, depending where you live in Canada especially, you might not be able to fly every lesson that you book. So I would always book, throughout the winter, I booked at least 1 or 2 lessons a week, and I got to fly like a quarter of the time. And sometimes it felt silly because I was flying and like having to like redo lessons from like months ago because it's been so long since I've been in the airplane, but it still keeps you sharp. It's still really important. So once you have those down, the next thing is to start thinking about PSTAR. Now PSTAR is the pre-solo certification process or test that you're gonna have to pass to be able to do your first solo. And there's nothing worse than getting the skills to be ready to do your solo and not be PSTAR ready. So what I did at this stage was I started to like dial back on the ground school, and my version of ground school was now focusing on PSTAR. And I did all that through Hanger for the beginning of it. Really the best way to study for it is just practice tests. I think there's gonna be 50 questions in the test itself, and maybe like 150 or 200 practice questions that you could possibly have on that. It's really important to just memorize the reasons behind the answers as well as like understand what they're asking. Some of it reminds me of like your car test and like memorizing the signs on the road. And some of them are pretty outdated. Like one of them is like, what color roof does a chicken coop have? because you can't fly too close to a chicken coop. Like, it's that sort of thing. I will say, shout out to Jen. A friend of mine gave me a different app to change up my study flow. And that one was just called PSTAR. And it was PSTAR, radio, and ALPT. And the reason she recommended that app was it gave you the answers like right away instead of like having to fill out the test and then like waiting to the end. It kind of like told you as you went. Really good resource. I would essentially do the practice quiz, write down my wrong answers, do it again, make sure I perfected it, and so forth and so forth. When you do that, you're gonna have your medical in your hand, you're gonna have your PSTAR written, and then you just have to wait for Transport Canada to get back to your school saying they received it essentially. But there's one more thing you're gonna need. You're also going to need your radio license. So this is the Restricted Radio Operator Certificate, so the RROC. You're gonna need to have that as well. I wrote it the same time I wrote my PSTAR, because again, you have to like submit it and have it all ready, because now you're gonna be operating a radio in a restricted radio by yourself without the instructor in there. And pretty much by this point in your flight instructing school, you would have been making those radio calls anyway. I remember in the first school I was in, I had his name was Mitch, was my flight instructor. Within like 4 lessons, he had me doing the radio calls, and I was so nervous because it was controlled airspace. So I had like a little piece of paper that I like wrote down what I was supposed to say on. And that brings me to my next point. Maybe by this point, or probably a lot sooner, you're gonna want a knee board. So the school has like a little clipboard for you to use usually. My Uncle Don got me this, and essentially it straps to my knee, and it would just help me write down the things that you need to memorize when flying the plane, so you don't have to think so much. For instance, sometimes the pilot in command might say, okay, we're gonna take off on runway 34 today. And as soon as he said that, afterward I was like, oh my God, which runway did he say to do it again? I just written down 34. That way, when I'm making my radio call and I'm like, Piper Cherokee is taxiing over to runway 34, because I could just look on this. And then as you sort of progress, it's great to be able to write down your time up, your time down, your off time, any maybe important speeds that you're gonna wanna remember, like VX on my airplane is 74 miles per hour, not 74 knots, 74 miles per hour. So I just write that there, I have it on my knee. That way, any type of information that I need, I can just glance down and be able to get it. Okay, and this brings me to another question that I get asked all the time, is flight simulators helpful, or does it make bad habits when you're going through the school? Funny enough, my good friend Rick, at first, he did not grow up in the flight simulator world. He was telling me that like, no, you shouldn't do it, it creates bad habits, blah, blah, blah. However, he now changed his tune and would say that no, it's actually a good thing. The reason is the new Microsoft Flight Simulator, for instance. I can load my exact airplane into that simulator and be able to sit there and look around the cockpit. Be able to look at every button, be able to see what every button does, be able to practice my approaches at the exact same airport. Is it gonna feel the same? No, because you're using a controller. Is it gonna look the same? Not exactly, because it's a screen you're looking at and like the conditions are usually perfect. However, it's still gonna get you familiar with the airplane and the airport, as well as some things that could happen if you fly too slow or stall or anything like that. So I think it's a great resource to try, especially the phase that I'm in right now, which is navigation, because you can even check your CFS, your Canadian Flight Supplement, for an airport. Let's say Muskoka is the one you choose. You can see what it looks like on the CFS. You could use your VFR map to plan a route from Toronto to Muskoka and mentally prepare yourself for it. And then you can hop on the flight simulator, fly that route like you would it was real, like take it seriously. And you'd be able to see and feel, or sorry, not really feel. I guess you can see what that would look like from out the window, or maybe what you would have to think about, right? Things like mountains and crosswinds and all the other stuff. You'll be able to see all of that on there. So I think it's a good resource. Is it better than flying the plane? No. Absolutely not. But, if you get rained out one day and you're sick of ground school, hop on the flight simulator and you can choose one of those lessons. It's so realistic that even getting into slow flight, you can see and like feel in the controls how the airplane reacts just like it would in real life under slow flight. And then you're gonna get to your solo. So now your PSTAR is done, your radio license is done, you've done the lessons, and your instructor is ready to do a solo with you. Right before that, I had to do kind of like a check ride with, let's call him the school principal at Near North Aviation, which is the school that I switched to, and I'll explain why in a bit. And essentially we just did a circuits, like we've been practicing with the instructor. He just made sure that like I was as good as the instructor said. He fine-tuned me in a few different ways. We talked about like emergency procedures, like what would happen if like the door opened up on takeoff and that sort of thing. And it got me ready and confident for that next step. And then we do solo. And solo is such a big rite of passage. So essentially what you do with the solo is you hop in with your instructor, they do one lap of the circuit with you, and then they hop out and they say, go get him, Tiger. From the ground, your flight instructor will now be sweating buckets or confidently smiling at you as you did your circuit. And it's just one lap of the circuit by yourself. And as you might have seen in my last video, it is a super exciting and really fun time, and it just kind of flies by. And then that's your first big chapter done. So that's what I just finished, and now I'm on to a few different things. So from there, I'm now gonna do specialty landings, which I did last week, which was my first lesson of like not just acing it my first time. I was overthinking it, the plane felt a little different that day, and it just wasn't my best lesson. But I did make a lot of progress on specialty landings, which is like short field takeoff and soft field takeoff and those landings that go with them as well. So that's next, as well as navigation. So now I've also been practicing navigation both on ground school as well as in real life, using things like a CX3, which is a flight computer calculator, to be able to calculate the things that I would need for that. Things like variation, things like crosswind, things like ground speed, all of those real-time flight informations that you're gonna need to use. And that's the stage I'm at right now without using something like ForeFlight or any of the actual apps that I'm so desperately wanting to download right now. I'm doing it by hand because that's what's gonna happen on the test. Same with like reading the maps. Like I have the VFR maps, I'm sitting at my dining room table sometimes just studying them, just getting familiar with like how train tracks look and landmarks and how to read them and stuff like that. That's essentially where I'm at now. I'm gonna be practicing my specialty landings. I'm gonna be doing a few more solo circuits, and then I'm gonna do my dual cross country, which is gonna be another really fun one where we fly from like Niagara to Sault Ste. Marie and back, and then I do it by myself later on in the training. A couple other questions I get is why did I switch flight schools? Because it is better if you stay with the same flight school. Essentially, I was at St. Catherine's Flying Club, which is an amazing school. I had an awesome instructor named Mitch. We were buddies, and I quite enjoyed both the experience at that airport in school as well as Mitch. But I did end up getting my own airplane. And at that school, it was gonna be a little bit tricky to navigate because of the hangar space and stuff like that. And I got sort of an introduction to the guys over at Near North Aviation in York. I really liked them. They were like, you can store your plane here, you can use it for lessons. Here's the price, the instructors, there's a lot of instructors right now, so there's not big waiting lists, stuff like that. And I was like, whatever, let's give it a try. I need a place to store the airplane anyway. I ended up going with Cameron and then now Charlie, and it has been an absolute blast. A couple of young instructors that definitely know what they're doing. Everybody around that airport is a great vibe, like everything from the aircraft mechanics to the airport manager and the owner and stuff like that. Everybody's been great, so I really like the little community that they have there at Near North Aviation. So there you have it, just a little brief on how to get to where I'm at in the PPL process, as well as just an overview of what it's like to get your private pilot license in Canada, because I couldn't find resources like this. I had all these types of questions when I started out. And now that I'm at this stage, I would love to be able to pass a little bit of that on to anybody looking to get to. And of course, you can just comment below and let me know what questions you have, and maybe I'll do more videos like this in the future.